All good. And we are here. Greetings, good people, and welcome to another edition of Cat's Corner. Apologies for the delay. I know Mercury is not in retrograde, but somebody is making it very difficult for us to hear ourselves. I don't know what the problem is. So if you could do us a favor for those that are watching live, could you just let us know if you can hear us? We just want to make sure, because I can hear Chanel can hear me. Just want to make sure you all can hear us. So when you get a chance, just come and let us know. I'm excited about this conversation because divine timing is always interesting. Chanel and I were introduced through Daniel Hatchett. This is one of, okay, yes, so we can be heard. Yay. And Chanel, you can see the comments that are happening. I don't know what it looks like on the phone. Can you see comments?
Yes, actually,
okay.
yes.
Okay, great. So Chanel and I were introduced via Daniel Hatchett. Danielle just be out here. Hey, Malik, be out here making sure that she finds the most amazing Black women for me to talk to. And last night, are you familiar with Clubhouse?
I'm familiar, but I'm not in it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm familiar. Yeah.
It's an interesting, beautiful dumpster fire, depending on what group you're in. And I ended up being pulled into a group. So I'm Nigerian, and so there's a contingent of Niger folks who have created their own little, country in Clubhouse. And the conversation was on love, sex, and the big O. And so I was like, oh my God, I wish Chanel was in this conversation, because the conversation around, as adults, around sexuality, around sex, around how gender plays into it was such an interesting conversation. And I was like, man. And then I was like, well, we're going to talk about it today because I got a sex educator coming through to talk to us about things. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And I'm absolutely excited. I love what you do. I've been reading up on, I've went to your site. I read up on, your bio is really interesting, and I'm going to get in all your business. And based on what I can tell, you don't mind it. So this will be fun. No. So what I usually do is I start off the conversation after I ramble about all the things with, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I am okay. It's been really busy, really hectic.
Right.
It's been 2020ing. But I'm okay.
Good.
I feel pretty good. Yeah, thank you.
You are an independent researcher, sexual educator, and mental health professional, and you focus primarily on sex education from a pleasure-seeking perspective.
Yes.
And I want to know initially, how do you end up in this area of sex education? Because it's something that's very important. And one of the things that came in the conversations we were having yesterday is how much our parents don't tell us about. Most people are told is don't get pregnant, but nobody talks to you about intimacy. So how did you get to this point where this is what you do?
Sure. So in undergraduate, I studied psychology and sociology. And so I knew I didn't want to do straight like clinical psych, because I thought that might be boring for me or not as interesting. And so one day I was having a conversation with some homegirls, and the conversation turned to sex like it always does. And I was like, I wonder if there's some kind of like sex psychology that might be interesting. And so from there, I started as a researcher first, and then did some volunteer work and, got some education and went into education and kind of went from there. The pleasure piece comes in after really researching and talking to Black women specifically about their gaps in education, their gaps in, their own pleasure, things like that. So it was really important for me to hone in on that, because I also want people to think beyond sex when we're talking about pleasure as well. We kind of associate pleasure and just automatically go to something sexual, but we can kind of expand that. So for me, it was important to hone in on that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Because especially with Black folks, like, pleasure is resistance, joy is resistance, right? Like, folk don't want us to be out here thriving and having a good time and kikiing and all of that stuff, but we have the right to. And
Mhm.
so in my little corner of the world, I figure I can push that narrative um, that we don't often see.
Right. So you talked about Black women and specifically, and as a
Hmm.
love of Black women, because I love Black women, I think we're amazing.
Yes.
I'm always looking for ways to make sure that people have go-tos and toolkits and things of that nature. What did your research show you, in particular, when it comes to Black women and sex and pleasure? What were you finding?
What's been interesting is that in my career, I'm starting to see a shift.
Hmm.
So I feel like a lot of our foundation is the same. So maybe you had like fear or kind of resistance around the conversation around sex, your body, even full emotions, how we relate to one another.
Right.
Um, but now I'm seeing people actively trying to unlearn those things. Um, and it is a whole lot of unlearning because it's not just about the sex specifically. It's
Hmm.
about body image, it's about health, it's about all of these different things that we don't often think about
Hmm.
when we're just talking about sex. We want to get to the fun stuff, the good stuff, but it's layered. Believe me, it is layered. When I have conversations with people, to see their sexual journey is amazing sometimes because some people are working from a negative, you know,
Hmm.
either it was actively spoken against or there was no education. You just kind of had to trial and error it until you figured something out. And there's just so many ways. The research that I do, I start from a historical standpoint.
Okay.
And so I start on the continent um, in the 16th century, and then I take us through how Black
Ooh.
women's sexuality has shifted, what's still the same, what's different, things like that. So kind of a compare contrast to see where we need to like what we need to be working on and then also what we have overcome. So
Ooh. So
yeah.
this excites me on so many levels because I do think, and so I'm gonna go on a rant just real quick.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I'm often like that I bristle against is this idea that somehow when it comes to intimacy and sexuality, that white people came in these imperialist forces and somehow uprooted a whole thing that was possibly happening beforehand. So I love that you are doing this research. What when you look back at the 16th century, when you're looking at the continent, like what specific areas are you looking at, and what are you finding about the sort of the sexual mores and practices of that time?
Sure. So I'm mainly looking in the West African countries.
Hmm.
And some interesting things where a lot of like ritual came up when
Hmm.
I was, kind of researching. It was a lot of like, ritual mates and, openness around sexuality, but also like monitored in a way. So it was really, really interesting to see it was also like lineage was very important as far as like women teaching girls about their roles in life. I also talk about waist speed sometimes, and
Hmm.
so kind of incorporate that. So it's just a lot of really interesting topics. Um, and then there were shifts when missionaries came and reported back to whatever country they came from, saying, "I don't know what these people doing. They out here living life and we don't like it. So it must be wrong. We don't do it like this at my house.
Right.
So this is incorrect." And so you do start seeing shifts from there. But of course, every society has its ups and downs and their own teachings and whatnot. But I really found that there was a lot more freedom and a lot more community
Hmm.
around sexuality, and we there was like destigmatized, like breasts were not sexual objects, you
Hmm.
know they're to feed babies, things like that, and completely different from America, obviously,
Right.
United
But
States.
when you say openness, I want to delve a little bit deeper into this because
Sure.
um, oftentimes, at least a lot of the conversation that I was part of last night, mostly, I would say, because of religion. Sex was something that happened only in marriage. It wasn't
Mhm.
something, and it wasn't necessarily something for pleasure. It's something to produce children.
Yeah.
Um, so when you with your research, are you seeing where sexuality? So I'm interested in sexuality as well. Like, how the different, are there, is there a spectrum in the sort of 16th, 17th century where people, who are gay are fine and they're not stigmatized? Or, is because I know that some communities had a third gender, so you weren't necessarily stuck in a binary space. And then I
Right.
also wonder if there were um, perspectives around sex where, being a virgin and being intact as a woman was some sort of sign of, elevation compared to women who were like, yo, I just like to have sex. Like, did you see any of that?
Yeah. So in some societies, a man was looked at, and I'm talking, heteronormative in this moment.
Okay.
A man was looked at as a thief if he had sex with a woman before the allotted time. So maybe
Okay.
they're going back to ritual, going back to, process. In some societies, there was a process around how all of that was supposed to be done.
Mhm.
And so if it happened ahead of time, ahead of schedule, things like that, then oftentimes, it was kind of placed on the man that he was a thief. He took that in some way from a woman. And like you mentioned, in some societies, there were, maybe two spirited people, um, non binary folks. So when I have this conversation with a lot of people, I'm like, gay folk, all of it always been around. Non-binary folk, always. This is not new, y'all. Like,
Right.
whoever's out there, this is not new. We just are putting language to it, maybe
Mhm.
that maybe previous generations didn't have, but everybody's always been existing. So I want to be really, really clear about that. So you did see that in some societies. Um, and sometimes in some societies, those folks were like even more special, and maybe they were elevated in some way because they had connection to, the divine feminine, the divine masculine, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I feel like, and what I've seen, it was a part of, oh, this person is two spirited, and that maybe they're the spiritual person for that year.
Mhm.
So yeah, I do feel like over time we have stigmatized and found some way to like make those things bad.
Right.
Yeah, so I do see a difference personally, but then there are some similarities as time kind of went on throughout the decades and the centuries. Then you
Okay.
do start to see shifts in perspectives, and a lot of times, and no shade to religion, but a lot of times it is religious faith that kind of spearheaded those thoughts
Okay.
and ideologies. Yeah.
And so, with the research that you've amassed, you go into this work, and what is your primary goal as a sex educator, as a mental health therapist, as a mental health professional? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's really important to add to the body of work around Black sexuality. When
Mhm.
I started this a while ago, there were a few authors that I could kind of pull from.
Right.
Now, of course, we have more over the years, but it's really important to know these things and teach these things. I teach to other therapists, things like that, because we in my world we say cultural competency, and that's just like a fancy way of saying knowing who you're speaking to. So if
Right.
you have some kind of idea of that person's background or cultural belief systems, then maybe you can speak to them in a way that they will actually understand and digest. So that's really important. Also, I talk to the community, and we kind of break down these taboos around sex and sexuality, and to have that knowledge and to have people think about their own sexual journey is really, really powerful,
Hmm.
because a lot of times things have manifested sexually, but it's about something completely different, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people's Unfortunately, a lot of people's sexual life is rooted in trauma,
Hmm.
and that's the foundation in which they're building their sexual selves on. So sometimes you got to go from the beginning and unpack that trauma
Mhm.
from maybe childhood or some kind of event and kind of rebuild from there.
Right.
So it has definitely many, many uses. And, a lot of men are like, okay, so you going to study black men next? And I'm like, ooh, y'all a lot, but
That's a whole nother barrel.
listen, I mean, I would love to, have a companion set of research. But I mean, it's a lot, and I'm still not really done with the first step because there's just so much to talk about. Yeah.
How does what you are researching affect or help you in your personal life? I'm in your business. Is what I do. It's what I do.
um, for me, it keeps me in check.
Mhm.
And I say that I do really like feel like I'm one of the most open-minded people that you can ever meet. I meet people where they are, and I think that is because I have done this research. Because within this, I've also interviewed people and all kinds of people who identify in many different ways. And it just broadens my own perspective,
Mhm.
which makes me more appreciative of the diversity of Black folks.
Mhm.
Because I also don't want us to think we have just one lived experience, and that's just not true.
Right.
And it empowers me to create the life that I want, create the sexual life that I want, to try new things. And,
Mhm.
if I hate it, I don't ever have to try it again, that kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And then to also encourage other people to shake some of that, I have to believe one way. And I'm like, you don't have to,
Right.
let's broaden that just a little bit, not to force anybody, but just to realize that there are other perspectives out there to consider. So,
Now, one of the things that's interesting about this conversation is that when we talk about this type of work, um, because you're dealing with primarily women, I
mhm,
think that because of the way we are conditioned, because I'm using that word a lot, because trying to, in some of the work that I've been doing and just sort of spiritual practices around, working particularly with Black women, what we're all finding is that conditioning has seeped into our very fiber. And it is really the reason why we're doing certain things, despite knowing better.
mhm,
And so when we talk about sexuality and we talk about sex in general and experimentation, what you find is that, like, and I'm reflecting back on the conversation that I was part of last night, how a question was asked around men being submissive in
mhm.
sort of in a sexual space, and it felt like it immediately went to some sort of homophobic act, or some sort of homophobic thought, and it was like, okay, why does that? Why do we jump to that? And so when
Yeah.
I think about the fact that men are like, oh, you can do something for the men, do you find that women are more? Because I'm sure you've had conversations with men and women, but when we
Mhm.
think about who is more, now I shouldn't say more, when we think about this idea of experimentation, the idea of being willing to maybe let's rethink that particular thing. I've been taught that this wasn't good, but let me rethink and see how I feel. Do you find
Mhm.
that men are just as receptive as women are?
In real life, yes.
Okay.
Now, they may not. You see, I said in real life
I love how you did that.
because, like, when I talk to people, I'm talking to you. I'm gonna
Hmm.
find out,
Right.
and so whatever the thing, I'm gonna find out. And so when I'm talking to people, I'm learning that there's just hesitancy because of the conditioning that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Everybody's interested in a lot of different things, but they don't feel comfortable. And I'm talking about cisgender men specifically, because they feel like they have to uphold the standard of like masculinity. I have to
Hmm.
present a certain way. If I might be interested in this, then that must mean this. And none of that is true. I tell people, like, and I'm going to go there, if you like butt stuff, then that doesn't mean you're gay.
Right.
If you identify as gay, then you gay. Like, that's it. You
Right.
know. And I try to encourage them. I'm like, there's a lot of nerves. I mean, you're missing out, but okay. Like, shutting or cutting off your potential for more pleasure or the potential to just open up another world. And
Hmm.
when I talk to black people about like kink or whatever,
Hmm.
I tell them, I'm like, a lot of y'all are already kinky folks and you don't realize it
Right.
because you have categorized it as leather, whips, and chains. And I'm like, no, it's a very, very broad, BDSM is very broad. And some of y'all are already participating in it and you're just not calling it that.
Right.
So a lot of, yeah, I'm finding that a lot of people are interested in a lot of things. It's just that fear of being different, a
Hmm.
fear of, maybe being called out in some kind of way. Because there's still a lot of like restrictions and like this box means this very specific
Hmm.
thing and nothing else. And so I'm working to try to get people to like, take the box side down, just one side,
Right.
and just peek out,
Right.
see what you like. If you don't like, you can go back in your box. It's
Right.
fine.
Right. Right.
So yeah, but in real life, yeah, yeah.
So, when I think about, because we've been using a lot of language around resistance. So, napping is resistance, and pleasure
Mhm.
is resistance, and joy is a form of resistance. Because when you're black, just breathing is an act of retaliation against oppressive forces. Um, but the conditioning, I always have to go back to that because there's this larger conversation happening where we're all on board where, yo, you will not um, you will not stop me from being who I need to be. My showing up, if it makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem. But then when we get into the community, there are all of these other boxes that are wearing people out. And I'm interested to see, I feel like this path that you've chosen is a gateway,
Mm.
an unsuspecting gateway. Because I think when we think about shedding boxes, we think, oh, you got to get spiritual, you need to meditate, you need to do these things. And we don't think about sort of sexuality and sex as a gateway for kind of shedding some of that.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah,
wonder,
absolutely.
yeah, I wonder for you, is that, have you seen that? Like, have you actually maybe sort of worked with someone through a certain period of time where you've actually seen that transformation occur? And what does that look like? What are some of the things that maybe people have to employ to get free in that way?
Absolutely. And I am obviously in a terminal, so please excuse the background noise.
No problem.
Um, if you can, I hope you can still hear me pretty
Yeah, I can hear
clearly.
you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, so I have worked with several people over the years, some personal friends, some clients, and my method is always the same. I'm just going to ask questions to get you to think. It's never good to force anything,
Hmm.
um, especially conditioning, especially when you're talking about conditioning, right? Because we get rooted in that thing, and it is hard to get out.
Yep.
Um, so when I'm talking to people and they want to kind of explore or kind of get free in a way, I start at the beginning. And usually we have to start there in order to, it's that Sankofa thing. And if people aren't familiar with Sankofa, just look back to see where you are, to see where you're going, kind of
Right.
thing. And so, yeah, I'm asking, how did you learn about sex? How did you learn about sexuality? What language was used? Did you get any education at school, at home? If you had a religious institution there, what was the messaging there? Did you get messaging around your body? What did you see around relating? Like people did, if you had a two-parent household, how did they relate? What are your examples? So
Right.
all of that plays a part into how we're going to operate.
Right.
You have to be super intentional about being something different. You know what I mean? Because if until you know better, you do better, kind of thing. But you have to be really intentional about it. And so, what after like kind of exploring that, I will ask people about like their desires and things they thought about, and sometimes I like say, what's the craziest thing that you want to try?
Hmm.
just outlandish, like even if it's, sex with an alien on the moon. Tell me about it. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I can see like where you're thinking. You know what I mean? It's a connection. It's a puzzle piece for me. So I'm like, okay, you started here. You're thinking over here. What are the actions in the middle? Not that we're trying to like get to the moon per se, but like let me see kind of what you've been exposed to. A lot of education comes from porn, so I have
Hmm.
to do a lot of like, I will say, unlearning and reconfiguring around that. Porn is entertainment, everybody. Porn is entertainment. It's not real life.
Right.
Um, so, there's that's heavy into it. So, I mean, there's so many levels. And then if you have trauma on top of that, then sometimes you spend a lot of time there.
Hmm.
Because that, is definitely prevalent in all communities, but especially the Black community. And we are not always talking about it, of
Right.
course. Um, so that brings a whole thing into it, like not even speaking up. So a lot of people are not even speaking up for themselves. So I mean, when I say it's layered, it is a layered thing. So um and it's an ongoing thing. And I tell people who you were at 25 may not be who you are at 40, and that's
Right.
okay.
Right.
Um and some people don't come out of their shell until way later. I didn't. I was like, I'm, almost 30 before I was like really like, okay, 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 we got this going on. And I was already in the field. So,
Right.
like we all, even sex educators, have their own journey to go through. We all have different upbringings and stuff like that. So it's definitely possible, but it's step by step, and it's going to take time and patience and being really, really intentional about it.
I want to talk a little bit about, because parents always come up when these conversations happen. It's always kind of, those are the first people that hopefully um,
Hmm.
talk to you about these things. My mother was a nurse practitioner, and she was very open. I'll
Hmm.
never forget the day I came home, because like I think I was in sixth grade. Yeah, I was in sixth grade, and the word virgin came up, and somebody was like pointing and laughing and saying, "Oh, you're a virgin," and I was like, "Okay, I don't even know what that is." So, okay.
Mm.
So I went home and I asked my mom, and she like took a deep breath, and she was like, "Okay, we're gonna have
Yeah.
this talk." And I don't honestly remember. It was interesting. My mother did not necessarily get into the mechanics of sex. What she did was, it was really dope, because as a Nigerian woman, I think she was really progressive. She said,
Mhm.
"I would like for you to wait until you were married to have sex, but I know that that's not going to happen, because
Mm.
this country and this country is different. So I want you to protect yourself. I want you to always protect yourself. And any questions that you have, there's nothing you can come and ask me that I won't try to answer for you." She also talked to me about how she didn't know anything. When she started
Mm.
menstruating, she thought she cut herself. She didn't know anything. Like, nobody had told her, and she was not prepared. And
Wow.
so there was she was very open about how much she didn't know. And
Mm.
as a result, there was like this really great, there was this, I mean, while she didn't explain the nuts and bolts, I definitely felt like, well, if I got questions, I can go ask my mama, as opposed to my sixth grade friend who doesn't know anything, who's just talking out of
Exactly.
it. There was, and whenever I think about it, I get a little emotional, because I think, particularly as a Nigerian woman, she was extremely progressive and open in ways that,
Yeah.
like, a lot of my peers said, they were like, "Your mother said that to you." I was like, "Yeah." And so
Right.
when we think about parents, we're all at that age where some of us are parents. What are some things that parents can do now to kind of stave off the potential traumas that we experience as adults?
Yeah. First of all, shout out to your mom
It was awesome.
because amazing. Um. Yeah. I think that's really powerful. That piece that she's like, you know what? I wasn't taught everything and I don't really know everything. That's really powerful. Because as an authority figure or as a parent, you want to, be the know all, the dictionary, the
Right.
thesaurus, the atlas, everything for your kid, and it's just not so. So when I talk to parents, I tell them it's a step by step process. If you start early, then it won't be a big deal later on.
Right.
And there is a way to do age appropriate education at every level.
Mm-hmm.
So you can start them as soon as they're able to interact. You
Mm-hmm.
can teach body autonomy. You
Mm-hmm.
can teach consent. You can teach, proper names for body parts, things like that. That's for the little people. They
Mm-hmm.
can grasp that, they can handle that. And technically that is sex education without it, having to be this whole thing. Because I think we hear the word sex and we automatically just go to the, you know,
Right.
like, you're a grown up. You're doing all those things,
Right.
you can teach kids about that. And then when they get older, you can talk about, um, more consent. You can have more language around it, talking about who's able to touch you,
Mm-hmm.
asking permission for hugs and things like that. And then from there, you can start talking about, relating to other people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a sexual way, but it's important to have that relational piece
Mm-hmm.
between, because kids are really smart and they learn by observing, and so
Right.
they're watching and all of that stuff. So it's good to have that in play for them already. And then as they get older, and now these kids grow up with internet.
Yeah.
I ain't have no internet when I was a little kid. Did not exist in the way that it exists now. 2 year olds can work iPads better than me, like literal 2 year olds can work iPads better than me. So there's also the layer of, internet safety. And, you don't even have to spell something correctly in order to find it.
Yeah.
So that's what I tell you, So there's also that level. And then having them know that if they stumble upon porn, if they stumble upon something that they don't understand, or, that's really advanced for them, that one, it's entertainment, and two, to create an open door like your mom did, for them to be like, I found this thing, I don't know what it is, I saw this thing, and and then not having the reaction that's so intense. And
Right.
that's a lot of, and that's a lot of things that I hear from people that I've interviewed. Like, if they did go to their parent, then it was this whole big dramatic something, and they ain't go back, because
Right.
who wants to deal with that? You already stressed out enough, and then
Right.
now your mama acting up, that kind of thing. So you're gonna have to take a deep breath, you know, and it's gonna be uncomfortable, but it needs to come from you as a parent, rather than letting these streets teach them, or these
Right.
internet streets teach them. So all of that is really important. But I encourage you, even if you have an older kid, like, make sure that they know that they can come to you. That is a very, very, very important piece of it. And then if you have a little one, doing step by step. And so it's not this whole big talk, when they get 12 or whatever the age is. So,
Right.
yeah.
Um, it makes me think about consent is a big part of now. It was not. I don't remember ever as a teenager um, being talked to about consent,
Yeah.
or even the way that we talk about it now. Like that never came across my.
Right.
And I think that particularly with the sort of way that we genderize behaviors, it is very important to have those conversations about consent. But we also know that within the Black community, those conversations get tricky for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
So, you know, in my culture, we're not, in my culture, you don't necessarily hug people. Like that's not the initial way to, there are sort of distance ways to show respect to elders. And I
Hmm.
remember, because I grew up here, my mother one day was just really irritated because I was in this phase where, because all of my friends hugged me when I said hello, that I was just hugging everybody. She was like, stop that. That's just stop that. But if there are certain family members, where you are close to, you are expected to engage them in that sort of physicality. And so when we start bringing in consent, you take your kid to the cookout, and you're like, Uncle Bobby want to hug him, and he don't want to go, and you're like, well, leave him alone. Then they're looking at you like, what's wrong? Why don't you, you don't want your kid around me? So how do you how do you help people understand how to engage with, talking to your child about consent is one thing, but then getting the
Right.
rest of your family or your group to understand, like, we should not be forcing children to hug people they don't want to hug. We should
Mhm.
not be that we really do need to let that go, because it's always,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, I've never liked it. It's
Yes.
it's always been,
Ah.
but now we're in a space where we actually have the language to say, well, if Johnny doesn't want to hug, Uncle Bobby or Auntie Sarah, that's okay. And everybody needs to be all
Exactly.
right with it. So I wanted you to kind of share a little bit about that piece, because I do think that when we say sex education, we think all these things, but even this space of consent is a really important part of
Yeah. So I love this conversation. And so now that I'm, auntie to many kids,
it. Mhm.
it's like, go give Auntie Jaali a hug. And I interrupt that and I say, you can give me a high five if you want to instead, or,
Right,
like letting them know that they have a choice. They don't have to hug me if they don't want to.
right.
And I do say that in front of the parents. And
Mhm.
usually, I mean, if I'm somebody's, play auntie, then it's not a big deal. They already know what I
Right,
do. But yeah, so I think it's about letting other family members know that, hey, we're teaching little Johnny about making his own choices about how to interact with people. And
mhm.
I know, like, the old uncles and aunties and stuff, they may not hear you, but I think it's one of those things where you have to kind of stand your ground.
Yep.
And the more you teach your kid about it, then it becomes normalized. You have to kind of reteach people. And you're gonna have to, that whole teach people how to treat you. And
Right.
it's a process. It really is, and it's not easy because, like you said, I've had to hug people I did not want to hug. I was not interested.
Right.
Either, like, they stink, or like I don't like their kiss. They kiss you and your whole face is wet. Like, whatever the reason was, not interested. But you slink over there. You lean in,
Right.
like you just
This
lean in your
side thing.
head, right? you just Y'all know that little lean in. It's so funny. But yeah, so I mean, it's really about being intentional. And I tell people, expect to get pushback.
Yep.
Go ahead and expect it, and have your answer ready. And you talk to them grown up to grown up.
Mhm.
And then, so that way the kid doesn't feel any more awkward than they already do about this whole situation of having to hug people. And or say, hey, we're giving out high fives or something like that. And
Right.
see if, like, ask the kid if they're okay with high fives, and just kind of starting like that, offering an alternative instead. Because yeah, that's a real thing. Kids have intuition, and they have their own feelings and stuff too, and we do have to honor that.
Right. In terms of COVID, we're now in the middle of a pandemic,
Yes.
and so you know, for those of us that are single, it gets tricky because
Yes.
now it's like on top of the distancing that
Sure.
experience as a single person. Now you're in a situation where you just have. I mean, we have to really be careful. Have you? What are some suggestions, advice for dating during a pandemic?
So I think what's interesting about this period of time is that you can really get to have more conversation with people, because of the distance. You're going to have to get more creative about how you interact, because you may not be able to be in someone's actual physical presence.
Right.
So I think, and this pandemic is kind of indefinite, right? We don't really know what it's looking like,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yes.
So I know. But we also have to realize, like, because of that, we're going to have to be really, really creative and really thoughtful about, like, actually having real conversations, because y'all might not, be in each other's presence. So then, if you're feeling that spark with somebody and you do, and it has some sexy time, that's gonna look a little different too. You might have to do some kind of cyber something, some kind of, use your words, or some phone sex. Or I mean, sometimes you gotta get a little old school or whatever.
Right.
Um, but like, yeah, I think I tell people like you're just gonna have to get more creative and more thoughtful about how you interact with people because this is just different. You just can't do it the same as whatever we did in 2019. That ain't it right
I have a
now.
feeling that what I do appreciate about the pandemic is that um, I think in a lot of ways it's requiring a higher level of intimacy than we normally have. And when we talk about sex and sexuality and just education around that, one of the things that I really would love more conversation on is what intimacy actually looks like, and what it actually is, and how you build that with someone, because I do think that that is, while sex is part of that, that to me is really the foundation of any sort of strong engagement across the board. That there is a sense of intimacy. How do you define intimacy in the work that you do?
I think intimacy is like a deeper way of relating to somebody. And I know that's very broad, and I leave it broad intentionally because intimacy looks different for different people, right? If you follow the love languages or whatever, um,
Yeah.
then
Wait a minute.
some
When
people.
you said whatever, is it because you're like tired of it? Because everybody talks about love languages now. But I mean, she's like, my love language is, it's like, okay, I get
No, like I totally get the purpose of them. I think sometimes we get like a little too locked in
it. Hmm.
onto having one main one,
Hmm.
realizing that you might want them all. You
Right.
might want one with this person and another one with another person.
Mhm.
Like I mean I like that. It makes sense to me. I'm
Right.
here for them, and I also want us to loosen the grip on them a little bit, and
Right.
and
We do.
broaden it.
We do
That's
tend to hold. We do tend to choke the shit out of stuff that we love. Yeah. Yeah. I
right.
mean,
So
yeah. The
that I
language.
just loosened it up a little bit. So so yeah, that's why I say or whatever, not to dismiss it because I completely get it. Like I can say, oh, my love language is like this and that to make it easy, and then we can delve into something deeper than that. So I think it's a good like starter topic, and then from there you can say like, what does that actually look like, or
Mhm.
tell me a time when that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So um, yeah, that just made me giggle because you're just like, what's the
Well,
eye
you know what
roll?
it is. I think that in a lot of areas now, so I'm a big fan of calling a thing what it is. Like when I can
Sure.
name it, then I'm able to like process it and
Yeah.
move on to whatever. And
Hmm.
so usually language for me is a way to clarify in a way that I may not have initially, it's just helpful.
This
But
is
what I
like
have
the
noticed
passenger for the Grand Rapids on plane
is
19.
that we have been adopting all kinds of language that in a lot of ways I think starts in sort of academic spaces and then has become sort of mainstreamed, or starts in these sort of new agey spiritual spaces and then becomes mainstream. And sometimes I just be looking at people like, stop, just stop. I know what you're
Absolutely.
saying, and I know it sounds deep to you, but what the hell does that actually mean to you? Like, what do you mean by that? So that's why when you said whatever, I was like, tribe, I know what's going on here. I know.
A1.
I'm glad
Exhausting.
you saw me, sis. I'm glad you saw me because I'm like,
It's
yeah,
exhausting. It's exhausting. You know,
it is. It is. It
it's just like
is.
it's like color. It's like color by numbers.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the same reason I
Totally.
don't like when we name hair textures. I'm like, what the hell is a nah? Screw that. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I digress. Sorry, 'cause I'm feeling ranty. It's Sagittarius season, so it's all coming.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, no, you're completely right. So I think that, I think it'll be a fun thing actually,
Mhm.
because you have to be more creative, because you have to dig a little deeper. Then maybe all this drama because all I see is memes all day about what men ain't doing, what women ain't doing, all this stuff. Maybe if we talk some more, maybe if we get beyond the surface levels and we cannot, jump straight to being physical, then maybe you can, if you are seeking a relationship that is, deep and layered and all that stuff, I will, put that caveat in
Right.
there because not everybody's looking for that. And
Right.
I'm here for that too.
Right.
A good situationship, here for it. But yeah, so I think it is about, finding those layers, and intimacy is a big deal, like you said. And I think you have to have that because if somebody falls ill, if somebody, has to take a contract halfway around the world, you're still going to be able to have to hold on to that intimacy because you're not going to be able to express it physically. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're coming around the bend. This has been so much fun. I'm really having a great time. So I'm going to try not to ask too many more questions because you're in a terminal. So clearly you're going. What you started your own company, and your goal is to really spread this word of sort of self-awareness, self-possession. I mean, that's how I interpret it when I looked at your site. And I wonder, what are the different ways you work with people? Like, do you see clients the way like a therapist sees clients, or do you have programs that you run? Like, what happens in the Jaali world?
Yes, so all of the above. I actually am a therapist as well.
Mhm.
I just say mental health professional to be general. But
Oh, wait,
yes.
stop, hold on. So you're a therapist.
Mhm.
Are you taking clients?
No, not at this time. I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, I was like, don't throw it out there and let people know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Because,
Which
you
is
know,
why I tend to keep it a little general because the next question is always, "Are you?" And I'm like, "No, not at
okay,
this time."
okay,
Eventually, and I will make sure I shout it from the rooftop when I do. Um, but no, we'll still see people if they need coaching through something. Um, Classes, workshops, speaking, research, writing curriculums for organizations. So it's kind of multifaceted. I'm still very much research based because that's important to me, and it's important to our, collective, in my opinion. So yeah, there's just many different ways I, try to incorporate everything into Jolly Co.
and so is there a book coming?
Yes, actually, I am working on a book based on my research. It has been, I feel like it's been taking me 84 years to get it together. But hopefully by the end of 2021, that is my goal to have it out.
Okay.
So I didn't record it and said it out loud, so I guess I have to make it so.
Yes, it's
Uh,
official now. And when you say it on this show, it has to happen. That's just them's the rules.
Them's the rules. So I mean, I have all the pieces together. It's just about compiling and adding a little bit more. So that is so it's definitely the goal. And then hopefully, if I can strategize properly, maybe to try to start a companion set of research for Black men and their sexuality.
God has blessed you. I couldn't do it, but God has blessed you.
That's why I'm like, it's going to take a whole lot because I've had some real interesting conversations this year, and I've had to cut some men off this year because of some of these conversations around sex, gender, identity, all that stuff. I ain't got it. Like, I'm not
Right.
the one to argue with about that kind of stuff, and they tried it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm a Taurus to the bone, and so
Right.
when I made my decision, I'm like, oops, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're looking forward to is this book that will come out at the end of 2021. No
Yes.
pressure. No pressure.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Don't sweat. Don't sweat. It's all good. It's all
I
good.
know.
And final question, the way I like to wrap up is really about thinking around well, who knows if ever going to be post-pandemic, but when we are able to like be out in the world a little bit more freer than we are now, what's the
Mhm.
first thing you're going to do?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I will probably go somewhere. I
Okay.
don't know. Go somewhere. I know I'm somewhere now, but I wasn't planning on being somewhere, but I'm somewhere now.
Right.
But yeah, like go somewhere with friends maybe. Or maybe like have people over. I miss like kikiing,
Hmm.
drinking wine and kikiing and that kind of carrying on. I love
Yeah.
a certain kind of carrying on, and I just haven't been able to carry on this year like I like to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
one thing. It's yeah. The carrying on is real.
yes, you understand what carrying on. You got to do the hand with it. It's like my kind of carrying on, and I just haven't been able to to do that. Concert stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah,
I
but
know. We're not going to
I
be
know.
sad because we're hopefully prayerfully we'll be done with this by hopefully by this time next year we'll be on a yacht
Yeah.
somewhere hanging out on the
Ooh,
side of a
come on,
sunny island.
somebody. Come
You know,
on. Come
we'll
on.
figure it out.
Yes. Come
But thank
on.
you so very much. I know that things are hectic in the background. I appreciate you pushing through. This was a great
Yeah.
conversation. Thank you for spending time with me today. I'm so glad that we got a chance to, blast you out to the world because what you're doing is really, really important. Um, any final thoughts? Anything else that you want us to know before I let you go?
I just want to thank you for having me and just to remind people that your pleasure is not canceled. I know many things are, but your
I
pleasure
like
is
that.
not canceled.
Yeah.
There is a way to still learn about yourself. There's still a way to explore and try new things, even in the midst of this craziness and foolishness that we're in.
It's
So,
so foolish.
take care of your just take care of yourselves and try to be kind to one another and yeah, I would really appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Well, we'll definitely have you back when the book is ready.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep speaking it into its existence.
Oh,
Apparently, I'm a
absolutely.
manifestor generator sort of
Yes.
personality, so I'm going to say it and it's going to be. So,
I'm gonna
let's
receive it. I'm gonna receive it though. I'm gonna receive. Okay,
okay.
I'm gonna
It's
receive
not pressure.
it.
It's just sharing what you already know. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you so much, Chanel, for joining us. I mean, I really do appreciate it. Safe travels wherever you are. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. I appreciate you all. Please make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube page. I need at least 30 of y'all. I'm at 21, so that I can change the name to that for something that's a little less long and ridiculous. And yeah, please share it. We are super excited to keep doing this for you all. And if you have guest ideas, please hit me up because I'd love to meet more people and like share what you all do. And so with that, I'm out because this culture ain't gonna make itself. We will see you next week where our guest will be Karine Latif of Craft Brand Theory. And I promise you it's not something you're gonna want to miss. Take care, everybody.